Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I think we should begin and the other participants can continue joining.
My one request is you mute all of them
Sure,
so that
sir.
I don't have suddenly people singing in the background.
Right.
Good
Yes, sir.
afternoon,
You're
everyone.
doing
Good
some
afternoon,
agile
sir.
Yes, sir. We'll ensure that everyone's on mute. Sir, I think we should begin
Hi,
and
Meet.
the
Hi,
other
Meet.
participants
Hi,
can
Ashish.
continue joining.
Hello, sir.
My one request is you mute all of them
Sure,
so that
sir.
I don't have suddenly people singing in the background.
Good afternoon,
Right, yes, sir.
everyone, and welcome to the seventh day of our faculty development program on sustainable development goals and English literature. It's a great pleasure to have you all here, and we are especially honored to have with us today a distinguished speaker, Professor Pramod K. Nair from the University of Hyderabad. Throughout this week, we have delved into the interconnected realms of sustainable development and literature, exploring how literature can be a powerful tool for raising awareness about the sustainable development goals. Our aim has been to equip our faculty with the knowledge and tools to inspire and educate the next generation of students. On the sixth day of our faculty development program, we had the privilege of hosting Professor Nishil Pandey from the University of Lucknow as our esteemed speaker. The topic of that day was cultural studies, key concepts. Professor Pandey delivered an insightful lecture on the fundamental concepts and principles of cultural studies, shedding light on its interdisciplinary nature and its significance in today's world. She emphasized the importance of understanding culture as a dynamic and multifaceted concept that shapes and is shaped by various aspects of society, including language, art, media, and identity. Throughout her presentation, she explored key concepts such as cultural hegemony, representation, ideology, and cultural identity. The session was engaging and thought provoking, encouraging participants to rethink their approach to teaching and research. Today, we have the privilege of listening to Professor Pramod K. Nair, a renowned scholar and expert in the field. His insights and expertise in English literature promise to provide us with valuable perspectives and inspiration for incorporating SDGs into our curriculum. I encourage all of you to actively engage with Professor Nair and take full advantage of this unique opportunity. Let us continue to work together towards a more sustainable future through education and literature. Thank you for your dedication to this program, and let us make today another day of fruitful learning and discussion. Now, I would request our student volunteer, Sarthak, to kindly introduce our speaker for the day.
Professor Pramod K. Nair, holder of the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies at the University of Hyderabad, came to English in 2001 after a stint at Kuvempu University, Shimoga, Karnataka. He was Smuts Visiting Fellow in Commonwealth Studies at the University of Cambridge and a Fellow of Wolfson College in 2000-2001. The Charles Wallace India Trust British Council Fellow at the University of Kent at Canterbury in the UK 2001, and a Fulbright Fellow at Cornell University in the years 2004-2005. He has lectured at Oxford, Edinburgh, Roehampton, Sussex, Sheffield Hallam, South Carolina, Dayton, Columbia, and other institutions. He is a Fellow of English Association and a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society. In 2018, he received the Visitors Award for the Best Research in the Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences from Honorable President of India, Shri Ramnath Kovind. Since 2013, annual studies conducted by Center for Publication Ethics, Pune, showed that Professor Nair has remained the second most published researcher in arts and humanities in India and South Asia, and between 7th and 9th in South and Southeast Asia. In terms of work indexed in the Arts and Humanities Citation Index, Web of Science. He has appeared regularly in Year's work in English Studies, the standard evaluative work of criticism in English published by Oxford University Press. A Stanford study places him the top 2% among global scientists and the only academic working in India in literary studies. Professor Nair serves on editorial boards of Indian Journal of Gender Studies, Celebrity Studies, Journal of Postcolonial Writing. Besides being a reviewer, referee for dozens of journals and publishers worldwide, he is a member of various advisory editorial boards. The Critical Posthumanism book series from Brill, the New Directions in Life Narrative series from Routledge, the academic board of the Global Posthuman Network, among others. His books have been published by Routledge, Polity, Anthem, Cambridge University Press, Bloomsbury, Palgrave Macmillan, Wiley Blackwell, Sage, The Greeter, Rowman and Littlefield, Penguin India, Orient Black Swan, DC Books, Viva. Other than books, his essays have appeared in anthologies from all these publishers as well. Interestingly, we, as students of English literature, have also studied Professor Nayar's books. The list of such achievements is endless, but I think his name is introduction enough. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much, Sarthak. Now I request Professor Nayar to please continue with his lecture.
Thank you, Sugandha, members of your department at the QPG College. Sarthak, for that huge introduction, which means I get less time to speak, which is good, because he has taken most of the time. I'm sure Sugandha will take the remaining 5 minutes. So that's fine. That's also sustainability of it. So when Sugandha very kindly asked me to speak at this FTP, and the subject was sustainable development, I thought it was interesting and important because as several of the participants here know, we are supposed to meet these goals by 2030. And whether we like it or not, the academic component of this has been a little lagging. And particularly the humanities and social sciences, because the sciences, especially green chemistry and environmentalists in the life sciences, are doing their kind of work. But humanities has unfortunately not been as proactive, at least within India that I'm aware of, in producing something which would push us towards an SDG-driven curriculum or an SDG-driven pedagogy. And this is a little unfortunate because, as some of you who are in administration among the faculty, Sugandha or Medha or others might be aware, there is now separate ranking parameters being accorded to those who are aspiring to or meeting the SDG initiatives. So it's good that such a program has been conducted, and I congratulate all of you, your principal and head of department, for thinking of this. Although I do understand that finding speakers may not always be quite easy, given the very specific emphasis. I'm sure if you were to do an MTB called Indian Writing in English, Problems and Prospects, there'll be 200 speakers. Kind of general, but this is more difficult. So what I'm going to speak about is a very specific sub-theme that I am interested in, what I have referred to in the title of my talk as eco-social justice and the novel, the contemporary primarily, although its history is a little from the 20th century. My focus remains the latter 20th and early 21st century texts. And this is part of my forthcoming book, which is why my request to Sugandha that it cannot be made public as a talk. It's coming out in May, June from Cambridge as Vulnerable Earth, the Literature of Climate Crisis. And this is part of one chapter. So I want to first make my point very simple. Questions of environmental justice are never distinct from questions of social justice. So you really cannot think of meeting SDG goals, environmental justice projects, greening initiatives, without also considering larger and historical accounts of, say, slavery, plantation economies, the dilemmas and tensions of the global north versus the global south when it comes to environmental dumping, toxic waste dumping, and environmental policies. It also means we have to account for questions of race, caste, gender across the social spectrum, because as history shows us, much of contemporary problems in and around the environment stem from a certain extractive colonialism which has been in practice from the 15th century, primarily to do with Europe's discovery of the New World and the rise of the plantation economy, which is why alongside the Anthropocene, a very common concept now, people are talking about the Plantationocene, because the plantation is where it actually began. So you can't think of something like contemporary deforestation and the global north-south divide without also thinking of the historical legacy of extractive colonialism, which begins with, say, the sugarcane or corn plantations in the Caribbean and the New World, and its associated social problem, race-driven slavery. So the environmental injustices of the first world, of the new world, of the global north, are inseparable from questions and problems of social injustice to do with race and the economies of slavery and contemporary economies of waste dumping and extractive colonialism, which still continues. As several of you know, the interest in quarrying for uranium and making use of natural resources such as oil from the global south has still been a priority for the global north and its economies. Now, on the one hand, this is very trendy, yes. It's fashionable, everybody's talking SDGs, everybody's talking ecofederalism, but its legacy is a far longer one than we acknowledge. So I'm alerting you to the fact that when we speak today of eco-precarity, one of the terms I used for some odd reason became very popular as the title of one of my books, and planetary precarity, do not think of it as something that is just contemporary. It originates somewhere else, several years ago, centuries ago, and its legacies continue to haunt us, which is why environmental historians like Jason Moore, with a OOMOORA, speak of the need to pay attention to apparently simple things like shipbuilding in the 15th century. And Jason Moore has tracked down the fact that when the Europeans were setting out for the Americas and the New World, they needed more and more ships and boats built. And it produced a certain level of deforestation across Europe. So he's drawing the connection between colonial exploration and travel and the exploitation of natural resources, which is where we are now also situated. So this legacy is very important. This legacy is something we have to be alert to. Okay, and you cannot really say that questions of toxic dumping and waste economies are a recent invention or that they're just technological problems. As Martin Heidegger would say, the critique of technology cannot be left to the technologists alone. Where the nuclear waste is dumped, where the electronic waste is dumped, is very often a race question. Is very often a question of global north versus the global south. As Ramchandra Guha and others pointed out, even speaking about the environmentalism of the poor, the comparability of subsistence economies as we see here, and the global north, which consumes far more power and petroleum and oil, etc., is really not a fair comparison. So we can't actually make the point that the same set of legislation, environmental legislation, applies simply because the nature of economies are different and there are differential life chances given to people. And those differential life chances are based on very often geographical location and race. So the term I use here is toxiconomies, merging toxic and economies to make one what I'm trying to attempt toxiconomies. Also because the word oikos is the root of both economy and home. It means both dwelling and economics. So its root is the same. So I'm using the term toxiconomies to speak of a system of dwelling, of home, and a system of economy which are both toxified. And by toxified, I don't necessarily mean chemical pollutants in the system. I am speaking of the nature of economic relations, such as plantation slavery, the sexual exploitation of slave labor in the plantations, as also toxic. My descriptor is a little larger than just the chemical. So please do understand the subcategory that I am talking about. Okay. So if you take a novel like Chen Qiufan's Waste Tide, this is a Chinese novel available in translation, appeared last year. He's speaking about an entire island, which is called, ironically, Silicon Isle, where electronic waste from around the world is dumped. What's important to recognize is this waste is what keeps the people alive because that's their labor. So all the broken chips, computers, cable, batteries are dumped. And you know that these are toxic. But, and this is the key problem, that's the source of their labor. That's the source of living. And as the novel proceeds, we discover how toxic this has been. It has created social hierarchies. It has created toxified bodies. And people are getting high on what is called digital mushrooms in the novel. It's a kind of virtual reality simulation, and people get addicted to it. As somebody says in the novel, the world's electronic waste comes here. We live in it. We are embedded in it. We modify it, and then it is remarketed as made in China. People try to stop this. People object. So this is also an example of what I began with. That this is global capitalism working to dump electronic waste in a region, exploiting the labor of that region, and getting a finished product from that region. Nobody asks what happens to the people there. But the people there, when they're told, look, we should stop doing that, but how else do we live? Which is the connection between dwelling and economy, oikos, and which is toxic. There is nothing else you can do. This is the state of your nation, this is the state of your society, and this is the way you live. Long-term effects, don't even ask. So Waste Tide, it's a massive novel, but it's worth taking a look at. Trash enters their very bodies, their homes. It determines their lives. And as a consequence, you can't separate the environment of trash and their body made of trash. As somebody says, the air, the water, the soil, and the people have been immersed in the trash for too long. Sometimes you can no longer even tell what's trash and what's not in our lives. We rely on waste to feed our families, to grow rich. But the more money we make, the worse the environment gets. That's the toxicology of the place. You no longer can separate their bodies, which are full of trash, and the environment in which they live. And they are prosperous. Why are they prosperous? Because they're working with trash. The more prosperous they get, the more electronic dumping happens, the worse the environment becomes. Question, is that sustainable? Is it developing? Because clearly, economically speaking, there is development. As in, they're making money. They're able to live. But what's the price you pay? Would you have bodies like this? Women have problems in childbirth. Children who are born with various illnesses. There is cancer. All sorts of illnesses pervade their systems. And there is a certain kind of economy which thrives in this. So the question that the novel asks is this development? And at some point, there is data. There was, and I'm quoting from the novel, there was data showing that the incidence of respiratory diseases, kidney stones, and blood disorders among the inhabitants was 5 to 8 times higher than in the surrounding areas. The population produced an abnormally high number of cases of cancer. In one village, every single family had at least one member who suffered from terminal cancer. And this brings me to the other point. So far, we have talked about what the crisis is in terms of humans. The problem is toxification of the economy doesn't affect only the humans. it affects the non-living and the non-human as well. So at some point in the novel, Kifan writes, strange fish filled with cancerous tumors had been pulled out of many polluted fishing ponds. The number of stillbirths refused to go down. Elders said Silicon Isle was already a place of evil. And the description goes like this. I quote again. The women did their laundry in the black water with their bare hands, the soap bubbles forming a silver edge around floating mats of duckweed. Children played everywhere, running over the black shores where fiberglass and the charred remains of circuit boards stood, jumping over the abandoned fields where embers and ashes from burnt plastic smoldered, swimming and splashing in dark green ponds where polyester film floated over the surface. They seemed to think this was the natural state of the world and nothing disturbed their joy. And these people are themselves called waste people. And waste is used in two ways. They deal with waste, but they're also wasting away. Wasting away was a term some of you who know the 19th century will know in the Victorians was a reference to tuberculosis, because people wasted away. And here they are waste people. They waste away too. So the question, the dilemma is, do you want to call this development? There's economic advantage, this toxification. But the point I wanted to make again was, we do not think of sustainable development as solely the worry or concern of the humans. Principally because, as this novel shows, among others, it also affects the non-human and it affects the non-living. The soil, air, and water are all damaged. Human bodies are damaged. The fish in the sea are also damaged. So when we talk of pollution, current debates about the air quality index in Delhi, we speak of how it damages the human population of the city, of the national capital region. How do stray dogs breathe in such a circumstance? During Diwali, for example, the level of noise and pollution goes up. It's a particularly sensitive topic because it's about religion and people are divided about it. But have we considered, for instance, how older people with blood pressure issues respond to crackers bursting? Humans. All animals are scared during that festival because they don't like loud noises. So the crucial point is that it affects more than humans. And SDGs, as the United Nations envisages it, is not restricted to the humans alone. That is the big thing. That when we speak of environmental justice, we are actually speaking of multi-species justice. It's not justice for humans alone. It's for multi-species where there is subsistence economy. Yes, you cannot tell people who live exclusively in forests to not hunt, or the Inuit tribes to not kill the whales, because whale meat is the only thing they can eat for temperatures that go down to minus 40 degrees centigrade. It's the only thing that generates that kind of heat. So that is a different debate, which is not something I want to address here. But the crucial part, as you saw from the excerpt that I read out, is that disaster, toxification, and environmental injustice is across species. So we are speaking of multi-species injustice when we speak of environmental justice. And that is linked inextricably to questions of race, of class, of gender. Which regions of the world are afflicted? In those regions, which class of people are most affected? How are women affected and children? So when we talk about eco-social justice, we have to ensure that it is layered like this. And SDGs are like that. If you look at the SDGs, gender plays as important a role as poverty or race, right? So this literature that I'm talking about recognizes that link. Okay, so that is my understanding of the toxic economy. I want to move to another theme here, because like I just said, you can't speak of injustice of the environmental variety without speaking about social inequalities. And when we say social inequalities, we need to think in terms of caste, race, gender, and other categories. Urban, rural, suburban versus urban, and things like that. Okay? I do not have the kind of time to explore all of this, but I'll try and touch upon some of the important ones. So I now want to move on to questions of wasted neighborhoods. In the first Odia Dalit novel, Akhila Nayak's Bheda, whose English translation appears in 2017, there's a nexus between Sachikant Tripathi, the forester, and Lochan Haiti, which operates effectively to steal the timber from the forests. The local lower castes, led by Laltu, defend their forests and cause a crisis. And the point is, in this particular text, the caste hierarchies of the social order produce environmental and human exploitation. The caste hierarchies of the village, of the belt, which is both the tribals and the non-tribals, produces this kind of unequal life chances, but also environmental exploitation. And the question of development, the question of prosperity, and the questions of waste are interlinked via this nexus. So the question is, who has the right to cut the trees? Who does it benefit? Who orders it? So the nexus between classes of people, castes, and developed versus undeveloped is important because it results in both injustices, environmental injustice and social injustice. So you cannot have one without the other, right? And the more you think about it, this is what constitutes the post-colonies development agenda, which is why several sociologists of development worry about what we are doing when we talk about development. Is development environmentally just? And following from that, is development socially just? You cannot separate them. So when people speak about development, especially those who are critical of it, note that development often means a very one-sided approach to the question of development. Who gains? Who loses? Are the losses the same? Are the advantages the same? So in Akhila Nayak's Bheda, it's very clear that it is not. That the tribals, the forest dwellers are the ones who will lose the most and gain the least. They are the ones who gain the least. So when we say development, are we talking about a socially just development? Clearly not. Clearly not. So the SDG goals, which are supposed to be evenly distributed, which are supposed to give equal advantages to people and have respect for the environment, doesn't quite work like that. Doesn't work like that. There is an interesting novel by China Miéville called Un-London. Un-London is about a London underneath London. That's why it's underneath London. So it's called Un-London. And what's interesting is Un-London relies upon those things which have been removed as waste from London. All that is wasted in London flows down into Un-London. And they build a city, a civilization around it. If you recall what I said about Chen Qiufan's novel Waste Tide, here is another example. So London is a large industrialized economy and all its waste is dumped somewhere. It flows straight into this place. And there are skyscrapers and bridges and things built around and with waste. And here is a description. The entire 3-floor building was mortared together rubbish. There were fridges, a dishwasher or two, and hundreds of record players, old-fashioned cameras, telephones, and typewriters with thick cement between them. The inhabitants of Un-London are constantly at war with smog and smog enters the city from the factories in London. It becomes an allegory for how we destroy another city. If we assume that underneath London there is a city, if underneath London there's a civilization and habitation, what kind of life is it? So there are these two adolescent girls who enter London by mistake, and then they are chased by a milk packet, which has become very interested in them. It's an interesting story. But the larger allegorical mode is something to keep in mind, that when a city grows, when a city develops, something happens to an adjacent city too, which pays the price. So if you're saying London, the world's greatest city, yes, of course, but what about un-London? What about all those places which London has undone, has taken apart, has ruined, has rendered into waste? This is also a waste economy or toxiconomy, as I said. Neyman's fantasy makes a larger point about toxic community biography by showing us how the waste matter from one city, culture, and region actually determines the lives of everybody in another place or region. So we cannot say that we are safe. And I want to divert a little away from this novel to speak about something else. Several of you might remember Chernobyl, the world's second worst industrial disaster after Bhopal. What they did was they created something called an exclusion zone, several kilometers around Chernobyl, where nobody should go. And they said everybody to be removed, people were evacuated. Several of the cattle and animals were killed because you couldn't carry them and they were infected with radiation and so on and so forth. Except for a problem. You can draw boundaries for people not to get in or get out. What do you do about air? Air doesn't observe traffic control. You can't build walls. That's when they discovered that butterflies born in Sweden and Switzerland, very far away from Chernobyl, were being born mutated. The toxins had reached them, despite what was called the exclusion zone. What did it exclude? Moot point. Which also means that if there is a nuclear war or a nuclear disaster, it won't be local. There is no local specificity to a nuclear disaster. My second example comes from real life too, the Bikini Islands and the Marshall Islands of the Pacific, the site of United States atomic testing till 1954. People who have gone and researched that area discover that the coconuts on the island have radiation. The soil has radiation. The grass has radiation. And there is a small problem. The half-life of some of those elements is 135,000 years, much longer than a human lifespan, which means to say that the region is uninhabitable for several thousand years for animals, plants, and humans. Now think of the question of eco-social justice. Coconut trees, the grass, damaged. The life forms which depend on them, other creatures, damaged. The humans who consume them, likewise. So there is no way of thinking of any of these problems as localized. It cuts across, it spreads across multiple life forms, multiple regions, and multiple locations. So what we need to understand is there are places where the people are deemed to be disposable. Now, Some of you may be aware of the fact that outside Union Carbide, the Jawaharnagar region was the worst affected in terms of the inhalation of the toxic fumes from the Union Carbide factory and the plants. Right? For sociologists looking at disasters, the regions immediately around that are called sacrifice zones. It means that the people in that area can be sacrificed. Think about how we are thinking about development. It's unimaginable that we have a term for it. But what can you do? So it happens. And note that the workers who are in those plants are poorer. So when we speak about toxic damage, we are also talking about toxic damage to the social fabric, the social order. So it's important to recognize that, let me reiterate, you cannot speak of environmental justice unless you speak of social justice simultaneously. Sacrifice zones are intentionally created, and the sacrifice zone functions as a buffer between the toxic industrial plant and the rest of the city, because in between there are these people. That buffer zone where people will be afflicted in some way or the other. And we are not really bothered. And by the time it reaches us, the potency of the toxin will be reduced, and we don't really advise so much about this. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to point to. I now want to move on to a different kind of novel, which is called the neo-slavery novel. Isabel Allende, Cynthia McLeod, Edward P. Jones, other people are some of them who are working on this. And my interest in the neo-slavery novel stems from what I already said. And that has to do with the fact that you can't speak about questions of environmental injustice now unless you look at a certain legacy, which involves colonialism, its legacies, extractive colonialism, and the post-colonial histories of development. In the plantation, in the New World, the slave's body and that of the animal were subject to similar exploitative processes. And man and beast are both exhausted, and the threat often issued is to the slave: if you don't stop being lazy, I'll shoot you down like a dog. The life of the slave and the life of the animal, the death of the slave and the death of the animal are the same. That's the plantation economy, okay? Then, of course, when the slaves wish to rebel, they are put down. We know that. That's not really the subject of what I want to do. The injustice visited among the humans in the racialized toxicology of the plantation is also visited upon the non-human. And the non-human and the slave are both replaceable. So, as Isabel Allende says in her novel Island Beneath the Sea, oh, the slave is getting ill, huh? Okay. Let's just let him die. It's cheaper to get a new slave than treat this one. So the point is, you're not looking at the slave as human, you're looking at them as labor only. And labor is replaceable. We have to think very carefully about this because that is also the system by which contractual labor is employed. We know the contract labor system in India, including in college and university systems, right? People who come to work for, say, 35,000 consolidated, then you dump a whole lot of work on them. And they say, sir, itna kya dete ho kaam? What do I do with it? And the principal says, if not you, there are several others who will come. There's no job guarantee. This is the gig economy also of the contemporary, isn't it? But the contract labor system is because you are seen as a resource. Isn't it interesting that they are referred to as a pair of hands? Because that's all that matters. laboring hands, part for a whole. You don't have to refer to them in their entirety as humans. So in the plantation economy, the labor was what is called fungible. They're replaceable. So one slave dies, throw away the body. But the slave died because of excessive and terrible conditions of labor. But really, you have to treat them, you have to send them to doctors, you have to get medication. No. It's cheaper buying new slaves. So the plantation economy ran on the assumption, not on the assumption, on the fact that labor was easily procured. And you didn't have to invest in them. It was possible to dispose of them. It was possible to let them die rather than do something more. So they were abandoned in the streets, and treating them as not worth the economy. So the slave body wastes away in the toxic economy of the plantation as entirely replaceable. The slave economy hinged on this particular fungibility, as I said, of the slave as a commodity. And interestingly, has less value than the sugar cane that they produce. So think of environmental injustice and social injustice again. You pay a higher price, you pay higher value on the product of the plantation and not on the labor. You're keener on protecting the interests of the plantation, not the labor. You take more care, invest more in the plantation, not the labor, because labor is cheap. Many of you in this audience, I'm sure, have heard of terms like sweatshops. People who build our smartphones, which enable us to get onto the internet, do not themselves own phones. The women in the sweatshops of Southeast Asia who solder and rivet our little tiny circuit boards don't have the money to buy phones. So the interesting thing is, our virtual worlds are built on the material labor of certain people. Sugarcane, the plantations is where it begins. Labor is cheap. So when we speak about plantations, and I return to this for another reason later, we're talking about the materiality of labor, but which doesn't possess any value. Classic Marx, actually, the labor itself is, so in several of these novels, somebody comes and says, this particular labor is slave is dying, ill, has become slow due to age. And the overseer says, oh, really? Just throw him out, get a new one. There's no question of helping them improve, because to help them improve, you have to invest more than you are willing to. It's cheaper buying. One slave was the same as any other slave, since both are valued as laboring hands. And this is the point that is important. You don't really worry. There is something else also that we need to pay attention to. And this has to do with the woman slave and the plantation. Remember what I said about the economy's fungible nature, that people can replace one with the other. In the case of the new slave novel, you also see these people, as in the women slave, embedded in what somebody has called the patriarchal speculative economy, where the Black woman was forcibly moved into the house as a sexual object, bearing children who are often sold into slavery, or becoming slaves on the same plantation with their parents. The white children survived because the Black woman served as their mama, or our terms in that time, the ayah or something, who take care of the children, but there are no rights over the children. So here again, you see what people have termed as somatic capitalism. You see the slave and the entire family of the slave as subject to the oppressive conditions within the structure of the plantation economy. No freedom, not for them, not for the children. It dehumanizes them. It gives them very little of freedom. It gives them very little of rights. That's not the only problem. It gives their children also no rights. Children born into slavery, and therefore no choice as to what they can determine as their future. In many ways, their future has already been predetermined. And in the 20th century, as people like Jesmyn Ward in Sing and Berit Singh and other novels have said, the plantation has been replaced by the prison. And some of you who know the sociology of imprisonment and law and order must have read that there are more African Americans and colored people in the prison system in the United States than white people. And there are descriptions in contemporary novels such as Jesmyn Ward, which clearly show parallels between the plantation of a former era and the prison of the present. And the same socially unjust system prevails. So you see what I told you earlier, a continuity between the plantation era and the present. And that the racism of that time continues into the present. And as Yaa Gyasi says in his novel Homegoing, in America, the worst thing you could be was a black man. Worse than dead, you were a dead man walking. Plantations and mining from the 17th century with their extractivism and overuse and fungibility of slave bodies prepare the my cough is not fully healed, so I'm sorry about that. The plantations and mining from the 17th century with their extractivism and the overuse and fungibility, as I said, of the slave bodies, actually prepare the grounds for contemporary environmental racism. Like I said, now Africans work in prisons, and those prisons are built on what were once the sites of their ancestors' labor. It's a continuity of space, of labor, of race, and therefore of injustice. If you look at that continuum that I have just mapped, you know, that there is the continuity of space, the nature of labor, the structure of racism, and whatever we think of as legacy. The exploitation of the land is coterminous with the exploitation of the black body. That has not changed. The form of it has changed in some ways. So you have, instead of the plantation, the prison. But the ownership of the body, the fungibility of the body, the exploitation of the body remains. This is the point that several neo-slavery novels are actually talking about. You know? I mentioned in passing the term sacrifice zones, right? Those are areas contiguous with industry, which are dangerously contaminated as a result of the mining and processing of whatever materials, whether it's uranium or whatever else, and whose residents who are heavily subject to this pollution are considered disposable. These are low income and often minority populations. They are required to make disproportionate sacrifices just because they want their jobs there. So the factory people say, well, if you don't want a job, you can go. So on a daily basis, how much of poisons do they ingest? And for how much salary? Like I said, these are low-income minority populations. So their social power, cultural power is very low. They can't. There is some campaigning going on now, advocacy campaigns and legal measures being compiled to attract the attention of the American law and order system and environmental protection agencies because of this, that this is no longer about just environment, it's about the people. And we have, as the American advocacy campaigns have said, We have for a very long time assumed they are disposable people. It doesn't matter. And there are plenty of studies that I'm aware of that show that there's a 70% jump in cancer in such populations. So that's 70% higher than the national average. You know that in several Indian cities, the number of bronchial cases are higher than the national average because of the pollution. So when we take that as a kind of environmental condition, we also have to take it as a social condition. Who can afford to live within air-conditioned atmospheres? Who don't have to be exposed to the poor air quality? You stay in air-conditioned houses, you step into air-conditioned vehicles, you get out and go into air-conditioned offices. You never inhale the air outside, right? So in all these cases, we are speaking about this particular problem of environmental and social racism. My final point is to do with the very nature of this distribution of waste and toxins. And this, I want to spend a couple of minutes again back to questions of waste. And this is Chen Qiufan's novel, Waste Tide. I quote from here. The crushed plastic would be melted down, cooled, formed into pellets to be sold to coastal factories, where they would be turned into cheap plastic products, the bulk of which were exported to countries around the world, so that people everywhere could benefit from the affordable made in China merchandise. When those broke down or became stale, they turned into trash to be shipped to China, and the cycle began again. So you see the globalization of waste. Waste comes into Silicon Valley. It is treated. Whatever process has to be done is done. It is then modified, made into products, and sold back to the first world, where it is used. Again, it gets old, doesn't work, comes back here. The cycle, this loop continues. And that loop is effectively globalization. So the continuity of this process, as someone says, that is the price that must be paid for economic development. That is the price. Yes. There's very little you can do about it. You have to live with the waste and the trash. That exploitative cycle also has a particular history. Okay? And this has to do with something that many of the contemporary novels and works like the anthropologist Stephen Mintz writes about in his Sugar, a Cultural History. It was the need for sugar in their tea and coffee that forced them to make plantations in the Caribbean. As several of these novels show, people wanted to indulge in sweet things. Where does sugar come from? But it required sugarcane. It is tropical. So you set up plantations. So you set up exploitative labor economies. And there the cycle originates. So as several of these novels, especially Isabel Allende's Island Beneath the Sea notes, it was the desire, and let me quote one for you. This is from Isabel Allende's Island Beneath the Sea. Someone must manage the colonies if you have to put sugar in your coffee and smoke a cigar. In France, they avail themselves of our products, but no one wants to know how they are obtained. No one wants to know how they are obtained. In Yaa Gyasi's novel Homegoing, a new plant is introduced into that area, and that's cocoa, which provides the cocoa for the European nations. Cocoa is what environmentalists and environmental biologists as environmental biologists would say, it's called bioinvasion. Those, when they come, take over the landscape. It fuels the economy, yes, and it damages the land, but it also damages the social fabric. That's the point I was trying to emphasize. So when these people sitting in global capitals want sugar in their tea and their coffee, where does that sugar come from? Where does their cocoa and the chocolate come from? Where does their coffee come from? There is an intrinsic link between the desire for certain kinds of food, certain kinds of drink, and the nature of the economy which is constructed. The plantation arises because Europe wanted sugar. You construct. But the minute you construct a plantation, you need labor. Where do you get the labor from? You ship them from Africa. And you can see very tangibly the connection between the land, the injustice on the land, and the social and the injustice of the people. You cannot separate them. They become disposable. And what's also important to note is that these are not local. It is because there was a global demand for sugar that plantations arose. It was because there was a global demand for coffee and cocoa and all the exotic drinks like tea that it produced wars and plantations. Which means to say, we cannot think of globalization as a contemporary phenomenon alone. Globalization, which was initiated in the 14th and 15th centuries, produced environmental and social injustices precisely because of a global connection. Commodities and consumer cultures, which demanded those commodities, forced Europe and European colonial masters to produce this. Which means to say, historically speaking, questions of environmental and social injustice are themselves globalized. So there is waste dumping now, there's toxic dumping now, there was exploitation then, which also means to say that whether we like it or not, whether we choose to or not, we are not speaking about environmental precarity in the Amazon or in Uttarakhand or in Kerala. We are speaking, in short, of planetary precarity. And there is no specific sacrifice zone in a particular territory. The planet is a sacrifice zone. I'll stop here so that we have 10 minutes or so for discussion as per the schedule that Sugandha sent me. Thank you all for your patient listening, and I'm truly sorry for the interruptions. My cough has not fully gone, and that's why I had to take those breaks. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, I request the participants, if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat box.
Sugandha, may I request you to please read out the question?
Has any questions? If they post them, I'll ask.
Good evening, Professor. This is Devansh Srivastav this side.
Hi, Devansh.
Sir, thank you for this lovely lecture, sir. We were all mesmerized.
Okay, can you speak a little closer to the... I'm losing some of your words.
Sure, sure. Thank you for this beautiful lecture, sir. We were all mesmerized. I learned a lot from you. So my question is, how does the novel explore the complex relationship between society and nature? Does it challenge the traditional views or propose new views to reconciling these two elements?
Well, the principal focus for many of these novels is to note that A, globalization is not new. It occurred several centuries ago in different forms. Two, you cannot speak of social injustice without speaking of environmental injustice and vice versa. So if you're talking reconcile, what they are talking about is we have so far looked at these as two entirely different strands, which you can't have. So if you're talking about tribal rights, you have to look at land rights. If you're looking at environmental injustice vis-a-vis the forests, you have to look at how these forests are exploited and what happens to the tribals as a consequence. I'm sure, Devansh, you're aware of the crisis and tensions around the Andaman Islands now, the tourism development projects that are being planned. And the view is divided, isn't it? It will produce a lot of economic advantage to them. But what happens to the forests? Actually speaking, there is no reconciliation possible because the price of one will be paid by the other. So you can't talk in terms of economic advancement, profits, and say, and nature must be kept pristine and pure. So the contemporary novel doesn't really offer solutions. It offers a critique, but the solutions also need to come from environmental policy, isn't it, Devansh? Novelists don't create policies. English teachers certainly don't. We don't know our own policies. What will you do with the environment? Sorry, it was one of my users. But thank you, Devansh. It's an interesting question also because what you are also pointing to is an ethical dilemma where, see, you cannot say that those people shouldn't progress. They should progress. But who pays the cost? Who pays the price for it? So we give them progress. We give them milk in sachets and water in the tap. And what happens to the land? Because it's never one without the other. So it's an ethical dilemma also. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, the participants, I think your lecture has answered all of their questions because nobody wants to ask anything. It was very
That can be read in many ways. I will not go into that.
But I'm interpreting it in the manner that, you've not left anything to be, desired. Everything has been already answered. So that is why the participants don't have any questions. Now, I would like to request our head of the department, Professor Rakesh Jain, to kindly give a vote of thanks.
Good evening, Professor Nair. Good evening, all the participants.
Good evening, sir.
It was really a wonderful lecture. Participants learned quite a lot through your lecture. During the last 7 days, we have tried to make aware all the participants, create awareness in all the participants about what role literature can play or English literature can play in the achievement of 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs as they are commonly known. The point is that if you pull one string, all the puppets dance. What I mean to say that if you contribute to the achievement of one sustainable goal, in one way or the other, all these 17 goals get affected. You see, the major concern of Sustainable Development Goals has been three-dimensional, that is environmental sustainability, economic growth, and social inclusion. Now, if you look at the lectures that we arranged for you during the last 7 days, the first lecture was about eco-criticism, biodiversity, which dealt with goal number, I think, 16 or 17. And if you take up the goal number third rather, which deals with the health, mental health, and health services for all. Now, if you take up the goal number 1, for example, end poverty in all its forms for all. Now, if we are able to eradicate poverty in all its forms, naturally, we'll be able to address the problem of hunger. We'll be able to provide educational facilities to everybody. We shall be able to sort of create awareness about discrimination. We will be able to eliminate discrimination in the society in all its form. So our role as teachers is multifaceted. We have to create awareness in our students, and also we have to play a major role in the achievement of these Sustainable Development Goals, because you see, if we are not able to achieve these goals, we will not be able to do justice with our future generations. As I told you, I think in my introductory lecture also, introductory speech also, that development that meets the needs of the present day without causing any damage or without compromising any thing with the needs of the future generation. You see, we have been cutting trees. I mean, our predecessors long ago have been cutting trees left and right. We have been trying to exploit the earth's womb for our energy needs. And what are we leaving for the future generations? So there has to be a balance between consumption and production. If we are not able to strike a balance between the two, we will not be leaving our earth a better place to live for the future generation, let alone our own lives. So I will not take much of your time because I know 7 days have been very critical. It has been post-lunch sessions, so everybody must be tired and looking forward to the last day. Now you have to also answer questions also. For 15 minutes will be given for answering. But before that, I would like to express my gratitude to all the scholars, to all the speakers and all the participants for listening with such patience, and my great professors and lecturers who have been able to deliver the goods for our participants, because I have been watching that most of the participants are attending with patience throughout this session. So thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Nair, once again, and thank you, participants, and thank you, my organizing team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Jain.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, I think we have one question posted in the chat box. If sir will be kind enough to answer, we'll ask the question.
Yes, please.
So the question is from a student, Mantasha Azim. She wants to know what literary techniques in contemporary novels help convey eco-social justice themes and enhance understanding to sustainable development goals.
Well, that's a wide-ranging set of techniques. There is the social realist novel, which is a common enough genre. There is the graphic novel, which uses the visual and verbal medium to talk about the same environmental crisis and the overwhelming role of technology. There is the dystopian novel and narrative, which positions the Earth as, say, 25 years from now. And you can think in terms of Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is also a hugely successful film, and the various dystopian novels that have accompanied Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy, Octavia Butler before that, writing in the 80s, as instances. So I can think of the social realist novel, the graphic novel, the dystopian novel as three principal forms in which through which these discussions of eco-social justice takes place.
Thank you so much, sir. I hope that answers your question. Now, I know sir's time is very valuable and he has given us so much time. We are eternally grateful for your time and for the effort that you've shown into making us understand the concept of eco and social justice. So thank you so much, sir. And if anybody has any other questions, because nobody seems to have any questions as of this moment. So if they post us some questions in the future, we will share them with sir. And if sir has the time,
yes,
then
we can do that. We can do that.
Sir.
Please just email me.
Okay, sir. So thank you so much, sir. And on behalf of the organizing team, I would like to thank sir and all the participants for giving us so much time. It has been a fruitful 1 week, and I'm hoping that there are lots of good takeaways for all the research scholars as well as the young faculty members who are joined with us in this faculty development program. So thank you so much once again, sir, and that will be all, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sugandha, Ashish, Mera, Tilika. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to inform all the participants that the feedback link will be posted here, but the quiz will be given to you in, say, around after 5 o'clock. And the link should remain active till 8 p.m. So from 5 to 8 o'clock, the final quiz shall